episode 27. Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host as we listen to eyewitness encounters involving one of the most terrifying cryptids, dogmen. Our guest tonight wants to remain somewhat anonymous. With that in mind, I'm going to refer to her by her middle name, Salina. Salina, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
Very nice of you to offer.
Let's head right into the first encounter that I was going to ask you to talk about. Please tell us about the encounter that your oldest son, Daniel, had.
He was driving his G20 van. Him and his wife were riding on Highway 40 West, and they had a 16-foot trailer behind them. And it was after 12 at night. There was nobody on the road. It was just dark as could be. His headlights were about 100 yards on high beam. And he saw a creature that had a wolf's head and had no tail, but it looked like the body of a man and huge leg muscles on this creature. He said its eyes were shining red, and he said it had really big teeth coming out of his mouth. He said he saw this thing for 15 to 20 seconds. Him and his wife both saw it. It had hands on it. They were very large with long claws. And his body looked flesh-toned, like it didn't have a whole lot of hair on it, but there was hair.
What kind of a size estimate did he give on that?
He said that he sits up high in this van. When they were looking at the creature as they were going towards it, he was praying to God that he did not break down. He said it was so frightening to him. He's in his 30s. He's a young man. He was driving up on this thing, and he looked right into the eyeballs of this thing, and he had to be about 7 feet.
That's pretty big. That would make anyone pretty nervous. What did you tell me about its eyes?
He said it just looked demonic. He said his face was just evil. They got the worst feeling from looking at this thing. And he said his eyes were glowing red in the headlights. That's what he saw. But he has friends in that area that have seen the same thing. And we're going to try to get them to get a hold of you. It's Highway 40 West coming out of Daytona and about 2 miles from State Road 11. And it's very dark out there. There's nothing, just woods.
Did you say that he did or didn't have a chance to take a look at its leg structure?
Yes, he didn't see, he didn't really mention the lower half. He said the thing never looked directly at him. It was looking across the road like it was intently looking at something across the road. It never even turned its head or never moved. And he just noticed the big thigh muscles. He said, Mom, it was just huge. And I was asking him for detail. He said there's just so much to look at. It was a breach sighting, but it was just so hair-raising. It scared both of them to death. And they just were praying that they wouldn't break down.
Oh, I can understand that. That wouldn't be a good time for that. Now, as if that encounter that Daniel had wasn't enough, your youngest son, Buck, had an encounter down there as well.
Yes, he did. He had 2 encounters. He saw a giant wolf-like creature jump from one side of the road in the middle and leap completely across the road. Just one touchdown right in the middle. And it happened 2 nights. I don't know if it was 2 nights in a row. I don't think it was 2 nights in a row. But 2 separate times along Highway 27 in Clearmont, Florida.
Did he ever mention how that one compared to the one that Daniel saw?
Yes. My youngest son said that this creature had like kind of a bushy tail. He said it was extremely muscular, and it was just unusually large, just a huge, huge creature, and it was not a normal creature. His back was about 4 foot high, and this was on all fours.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a pretty big specimen if it was that tall when it was down on all fours. Now, I understand that you've got a client from Bucksnort, Tennessee that had an encounter as well. Please tell us about that.
She has a little girl, she had a little girl at 10 years old. This little girl is older now. The little girl was going down the road, alone, and this is a highway along there. It's probably the most traveled highway, but it's heavily wooded with high hills, a lot of boulders, hollers, and caves. There's a lot of caves in Bucksnort. Well, the child was walking along the road by herself, and this giant bear-like creature, she thought it was a bear. She's 10 years old. This thing run after her on 2 legs. And she said that when she finally got home, she ran down the road, and there were a couple of cars that were coming down the road that actually got between this thing and her. The cars actually saw this because when she was running from this thing, she got away, and she mentioned that if it wasn't for these cars, that she probably wouldn't have gotten away from the creature. But it was running on 2 legs after her very quickly, and that it had it was very angry at her, and it was mad at her or angry. It was coming after her and saw this thing was terrifyingly chasing her. And when she finally got to her mother's house, she closed the door and slid down the door, and she was pale. Her mother said she was pale, and said that this bear chased her, and that it was running at her on 2 legs. So I don't think this was a bear. Her mother actually said that when she was hanging clothes out one day, she just looked above her on the ridge. There's a big hill behind there, and she saw 3 big figures. They were unusually large, standing on the ridge above her. And she just ran in the house. She didn't even finish hanging the clothes out. So, there's something there, definitely.
Ew, if I saw something like that, I think I'd be calling up Remax to get out of there.
I would not let my child run around out there alone. You always go in numbers when you go into the woods or anywhere near the woods. Don't go alone in the woods or anywhere near the woods.
Yeah, especially not anymore since these encounters are becoming so much more common. Not a good situation. You mentioned the fact that the girl described what she was being chased by as looking like a bear. People have coined the nickname Bearilla to describe the dogmen that are seen in that region. So I'm not surprised that she, not knowing any better, would have thought it was a bear that was chasing her.
Well, she said it was very tall, and there are bears in Tennessee, but they don't get really tall. And they live in the mountains. This is Middle Tennessee area, and that's the area that I live in, and I travel a lot of counties all throughout Middle Tennessee, and I talk to new people almost every day in my profession.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we know that it wasn't a bear that was chasing anyone on 2 legs. That's just not going to happen. Salina, if you don't mind, please tell us about the client that is from Houston County that had an encounter.
Her and her husband were in the truck, regular pickup truck, and he's a hunter. He, has been hunting since he was a little kid. And they were driving down Highway 13 and noticed something standing in one of the fields. And they looked at each other and they said, "Hey, what was that? Let's go back and look." And so they went back, and the thing was still standing there. And they pulled along the side of the road, and they were staring at this thing. It was looking at something. So she said, "I'm just going to get the binoculars." He had binoculars in his truck because hunters do. They keep things in their truck like that. And she got out and put her elbows on the hood of the truck and was staring at this thing. It was black and taller than a street sign. She said her husband was behind the wheel. They were both staring at this thing, and it had a snout, and it was all black, and it was kind of lanky, up and down lanky looking. Didn't have, wasn't real bulky like a bear. It had kind of skinnier arms. It looked like human arms, but she said it had claw fingers. She could make that out with the binoculars. And she said this thing turned its head and looked her way towards the truck. I asked her about the eyes, but all she said was she didn't really see the eyes. It was 3:30 in the afternoon, so it was daylight. She said that there was hair all down its face, all down the whole body, all pitch black, really black hair. But she didn't notice the eyes from that far away. I asked her about ears, and I don't think she saw ears, but it had a snout, and she didn't see a tail. But, that doesn't mean it wasn't there. But I don't even know how far in the field she saw it. But she stared at this thing for quite a while. Her and her husband were looking at this thing. So he says, well, I'm going to beat my horn and see what it does. And he did. He beat the horn. And she said she has never seen anything run so fast. It ran into the wood line and slid down and was looking at them, slid down behind a tree and was looking at them. And she said it ran on 2 legs. It did not run on 4 legs. And it ran really, really, really fast.
Did she ever mention anything about its leg structure looking like a man's, or how its leg structure looked like a dog?
She didn't mention the bottom half of the legs. She said it had arms like a human. It had a snout. And her husband argued to this day that he said, oh, it's a Bigfoot. She said, it can't be a Bigfoot. It's got a snout. So they argue about that to this day, but they both saw it, and I spoke with him too. And he had the same exact thing to say that she did. Their stories corroborate pretty well.
If they thought, or if he thought it was a Bigfoot at first glance, it tells me that more than likely it was a type 3 because its leg structure would have been noticeably different from a Bigfoot, that is, if it was a canine type. So that tells me a lot. The fact that you said that they reported it as being jet black, that doesn't surprise me either, because in that region, in your neck of the woods, black is the color that is almost always reported, at least in my experience, from eyewitnesses when they talk about the dogmen or dogman that they saw.
Yes, it was very, very black looking. She didn't see any other colors on it. And they looked at it for a while. She said it just stood there in the field, and he said, well, let's beat the horn and see what it does. And she said it just sprinted towards the wood line.
Yeah, that's pretty strange stuff. That's a day they're never going to forget, I guarantee that. Well, moving forward, Salina, would you mind telling us about the werewolf of Montgomery Bell Park and also Werewolf Springs?
There is such a thing as Werewolf Springs. It is in Montgomery Bell Park, and anybody can do a search on the computer and find it. Montgomery Bell Park is in Dixon County, Tennessee, and there have been rumors about there's been people that have had incidences with a creature in that park over history and legend.
Yeah, I'm not too sure I would want to go into a park in the first place that was named Werewolf Springs. Normally when you've got a place that's named Werewolf Springs, Devil's Mountain, Devil's Hole, a name like that, that place has that name for a reason. With that in mind, I'm not so sure I would want to go hang out at a place called Werewolf Springs. That's probably not the best thing to do.
There was a man named Montgomery Bell, and he owned all that property at one time. He was pretty wealthy. He had people that worked for him, servants and such. And he was on a horse-drawn carriage, and something attacked him and his helper this particular day. I don't know if it was day or night, but it's part of the story. This is part of the legend, and it really happened. Horses were attacked, or the mules, whatever was pulling his wagon, and the helper was killed. And when he wrote about this, the way they talked back then is he said he was very unpleasantly killed, which means it was probably pretty bad. And the horses were also attacked, and very unpleasantly, which, probably mutilated to a point. He hired a bounty hunter to come and find this creature, hunt it down, and kill it. And this man was pretty well renowned bounty hunter, and it gives his name in the story. But he tangled with this thing one night, and he prayed that he got out of there alive the next morning. And he did. He got out of there alive, but he did not want to go back in there and find that creature. So Mr. Montgomery Bell was out of luck, and this man left. It scared him so bad, the big bad bounty hunter.
Well, I can understand why, if even someone like that ran into a dog man or what he thought was a werewolf, It's funny you mentioned how Montgomery Bell talked about the horses and the helper not being killed in a pleasant fashion. I can't imagine any way that would be a pleasant fashion to be killed by something like that. Not good. And also wanted to ask you, Salina, could someone go online and Google that encounter that Montgomery Bell had and read more about that?
You can go under any search engine. I like to use Bing or Yahoo or DuckDuckGo, because if you use Google, sometimes they hide a lot of searches. Type in Werewolf of Montgomery Bell, and it will come up.
That sounds like my kind of story. Moving forward, in that neck of the woods, I understand there's a place called White Bluff. Could you tell us about the White Bluff Screamer?
There is a legend that this particular beast screams, and it's very chilling. It doesn't sound like any animal in the woods. And hunters and people that are used to the woods out there, which is just very deep woods out there in White Bluff, Tennessee. It's more growed up now than it was years ago, but still, people are still hearing this thing scream. And it killed an entire family one night. This family had a house built out there in the woods in White Bluff, and they were getting annoyed because this thing was screaming in the woods and screaming and screaming. And he said, well, I'm going to go hunt that thing down and make it stop screaming. It was at night. They're trying to sleep. So he went out there, and when he came back home, his whole family was killed.
Wow.
You can look this up.
In the town of Charlotte, close by, you've got a friend that was telling you about a horrible incident that happened in the middle of the night to her pony. Please tell us about that.
Well, as part of my job, I visit people's houses, and I was driving down a road in Charlotte, Tennessee. It's very heavily wooded and very hilly, very deep hollers and hills, and I went by a dwelling, a person's house, and there was a sign. It was wood, and in spray paint, it said, "Bear killed pony." That's all it said. And I drove past her house to my client's house, and my client was telling me what happened to her pony, and that there was a little dog that was halfway eaten, killed, a small one, a small dog, and the people across the street from her had a couple of dogs that were mangled behind their house. When I left their house, I went over to her house and drove in the driveway, and she came outside and explained, because she was leaving at the time, that her pony was an old pony, and it was out there by himself, and he had a pretty nice pasture out there and a paddock up by the house with a little barn, and she was looking for her pony and noticed that there were like scuffly marks and drag marks, like her pony was drug around the paddock in the area, and they looked for the pony. It was stuffed up under one of these juniper trees, or they're like cedar trees. This is in Middle Tennessee. They're really juniper trees, but some people call them cedars, and the boughs grow all the way down to the ground, and they're kind of sharp. If you go up under there, it's not comfortable. And her pony never went under there. Well, it was kind of crunched up underneath this cedar tree. When they extracted the pony, I had claw marks on the side of his neck, and on the very back of his butt, like right near his tail, there were claw marks, but no bite marks. There was no bite marks on the pony. No other marks except for what I just told you about.
That is pretty strange. I can't think of an animal in that area that would have behavior that would match what happened there. A bear, if it had killed that pony, bears kill by mauling. That pony's carcass, its hide would be all marked up with bite marks and claw marks and whatnot. Mountain lions, they kill by attacking the throat, normally a bite to the back of the neck, depending on the size of the animal. That didn't happen. It sounds like no evidence matches.
Well, she said that they seen this big, hairy kind of look like a bear to them because there's no lights on that road. The only lights are from the houses along that road, and they're very sparsely laid out houses along that road, and lots of deep, thick woods and deep hollers. Well, they thought it was a bear because they seen an outline of the hairy body, and it was black. And the neighbors actually saw it too. And the sheriff, when he came out, he told all the people along the road there, do not go out at night without a high-caliber weapon.
I could see why with all that going on. I'd like to move on to activities that have happened closer to home for you. Unfortunately, you've had for some time now issues with your dogs being attacked. Please tell us about that.
It was August of 2013, and I have Brazilian Mastiffs. I have Fila Brasileiro. I actually rescue them. I had a 6-foot fence around my farmhouse, and they have a huge yard. They run all around the yard. They protect my home, and I have 6-foot gates. So I have a farm. The livestock are out. I have pastures on either side of the house and in the back. It's very heavily wooded way in the back. It goes for a very long way, miles of deep woods back there. And there are farms along the road here where I live. And August of 2013, my big 152-pound dog, he is the head of the pack, by the way. When I came home, he had, and this is from work, he had huge holes in his chest, and his chest was just mauled. He had claw marks underneath each arm, deep, deep, very sharp claw marks. And when these dogs, if they attack something, this breed, they will knock it to the ground and hold it down. The markings were all underneath his body. Something had to have come into where is the enclosure, the fenced-in area, to attack him, because they can't get out. They don't get out. And when I come home, he was okay, but he had his chest was completely mauled, skin hanging, terrifying. I took him to the vet, and I got him antibiotics, and I irrigated his wounds, and they were so deep, you could stick the tip of your finger in each hole. That's how deep and big these holes were. The female that I had rescued, a few months after that, it was November, I come home, it had turned dark, and I have wood floors all in my house, and I have a doggy door, and she was in the living room on the wood floor, bleeding out. She was sitting up on her haunches with her chest kind of like a sphinx would sit, with the elbows on the ground and the haunches. And she was kind of making a gasping sound, and I couldn't believe she was bleeding out. And I laid her over, and look, she died within 20 minutes, I guess from loss of blood. But she had all these attack wounds underneath her chest, just like the male did a few months before. But he actually lived. She died of blood loss. She had a fatal hole, it looked like, right under her chest cavity, which was bleeding out when I turned her over. And you could stick your fingers in these holes. They were so big. This was not anything I've ever seen. Teeth marks in this thing were just gaping holes. And the same really sharp, just the sharpest you could ever imagine claw marks under the arms. And it was really horrible. So they were both attacked, and she actually died within 20 minutes. But after the winter time, that was November, it was that March, I had 5 Mastiffs left at the time, and they were hitting the back fence. If you walk out my back door, you'll see the pasture in the woods. Well, the dogs were hitting the back fence, really wanting to get whatever it was that was out there. And it was early in the morning. There was a mist out there, and it had just turned daylight. So I went sideways out the double gates, the 6-foot gates that I have, and I snuck around to look and see what they were barking at. And this thing was laying in the grass, very tall grass there, and I'm looking and I'm like, what is this thing doing? This thing was stalking my dogs. Now, my dogs are anywhere from 152 pounds to 130 pounds. There were 5 of them, and they wanted to kill whatever this was. They wanted it to get at it really bad. And whatever this was that was laying in the grass, was stalking them. Now, what in the world would sit there in the grass like that and stalk these 5 large animals, these 5 large dogs that wanted to kill it? Well, I couldn't take my eyes off of it, and I'm trying to see what it was, and I'm looking for a head. Like, what is that? And at that time, it must have seen me because its legs started flailing around, and they were black. All I saw was black, and it kind of legs went up and over, and then I saw the body turn, and it never stood up. Whatever this thing was just creeped on the ground away, and it wasn't small. It had just, the legs went flying, and then it just creeped away, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what that was. I could not identify this thing. So it was very scary.
I can't even imagine what it must have been like to come home from work and find your dog bleeding out like that. That had to be awful, and I'm so sorry to hear about that. As far as candidates for what that could have been that did that to your dogs, I can't really think of anything that is a naturally occurring animal that you would expect to see out there that would attack that way. If a bear had gotten in there somehow, you would know it. There would be evidence that would point towards it, whether footprints or the damaged fins possibly. It just doesn't sound like it would be.
I don't think bears can't jump 6 foot in the air. I mean, they can climb over, but then the fence there would have been evidence of that.
I agree. Yeah, they wouldn't be able to jump that fence, but I could see a black bear being able to climb over that fence without too much difficulty. But exactly, I think there would be evidence that would clearly point towards it being a bear, and I don't think for a second that you would see that kind of damage on your dog. The injuries would be different than the injuries of what you saw, in my opinion, from your female that died, unfortunately, and that big male that you mentioned. Now, having said that, you said that what you saw in the grass that was stalking your dogs was black. Is that the subject that you sent me that picture of that one night so I could check it out?
I imagine it. The only thing I could think of is it had to be because it was black, and I have game cams out there, and I see coyotes and plenty of deer, raccoon, creatures like that, and when they show up on the game cam, you can see the grayish, and the colors, they're not black. This thing that I got a picture of was black, and the way I had the game cam set up was in 5 seconds, it was to take 3 pictures once it was tripped, once the beam was tripped. This thing was only in 1 frame. It was black, and it was on the ground, kind of creeping on the ground.
I remember looking at that picture, and the picture was so dark because it was nighttime. It was really hard to make out the subject, which, like you mentioned, was black. I can't say with 100% certainty that it was a dog man, but in my opinion, all the evidence points that way.
It looks like there's one leg in that photo, the largest part of the creature. You can see kind of an elbow kind of bent down. You'll look at the very bottom there and you'll see an appendage. You'll see some type of arm, elbow. That's what I saw. Anyway, you'll see it.
If it has an arm or an elbow, then that right there, that tells us all we need to know about what it is. I guess it could be a Bigfoot, but the evidence doesn't point that direction. If you have a Sasquatch that's attacking and killing, it's going to do so by blunt force trauma. People that are very knowledgeable about the topic have told me, not with tooth and claw like what happened in your case on 2 separate occasions. Now, moving forward here, other things have happened on your property, Salina, that I want to talk about. Let's talk about the encounter that took place in your house late that night.
Well, I don't sleep with the lights off anymore, but I leave it really dark when I sleep. I had all the lights off. My dogs have their own beds. They're like people, and they're big like people. I mean, I don't consider them people, but they're my guard dogs, but they're very heavy, and they have their own beds, and I take the sheets off once a week and wash them and put them back on the bed for them. They're mastiffs. They're huge dogs, and they have their own, little place. So there I was, sleeping one night, and woken out of a dead sleep. My dogs all jumped up and grabbed something at the threshold of the bedroom door. Now, I have wood floors. And they jumped up and grabbed this thing. I could not see what it was because it was black. But my dogs are not black. I do not have any black dogs. So I could see their heads around this thing, but not the thing itself. And I'm like blinking my eyes and looking at it. I couldn't make out what it was. And I'm like, I don't want, whatever it was, I didn't want them killing it in my house. So I just screamed. I screamed, no! Well, they do what I tell them to do. And I went, no, and they all let go. They let go. And this thing, I could hear thump, thump, thump. And I could hear the doggy door flaps. And I just tore out after this thing. And we turned the lights on. I looked out there, and whatever this thing was, it took off so fast, there was a little bit of pee on the doorstep. That's all I saw. But I did not see the creature. Now, if it was like a regular woodland creature, I don't think it would have run that fast. How could something run that fast and not make even a sound out there? That there's, out that door, there's cement, and then there's a gate, a 6-foot gate. I was baffled because I thought as fast as we ran out there, we'd at least be able to see it.
Yeah, you would think so, but dogmen are very, very fast, almost unbelievably fast, and they're incredible jumpers. Jumping that fence wouldn't make any noise, at least not that much noise, if you were in pursuit especially. You said it left some pee on the doorstep there. At least your dogs left an impression on it, it sounds like.
Yes, and I used to love running through the woods early in the morning before work. Early. I would take the Mastiffs for a run, and we would just run, and I'd walk and run, and I just love getting out there and running through my woods. So, if anything was going to bother me, plus I have plenty of guns, and I usually am armed when I go outside in the woods, and I'm usually armed anyway. But I don't know if anything would have bothered me out there with those dogs. One time, there was something that ran out of the bushes in one of the hollers, and it was in the wintertime. It was some years ago. It looked like a sloth. This particular thing was like a reddish color, not real red, but kind of like maybe a darkish red. And it ran. My dogs chased it. And I was screaming at them to come back. Now, I've been in the woods my whole life, and I looked up the Tennessee wildlife. I'm from Florida, but I've been up here for many years, and I've looked up Tennessee wildlife, and I could not figure out what this was. It looked like a sloth, but it was kind of, it was kind of jacked up looking, like its rear, and the head kind of went into a point, but I don't know what it was, and I'm still baffled because we're not supposed to have bear in this area, and I don't know if there's any bears are that color, but that's one of the crazy things that I saw. And another time, recently, I was out there at one of my pastures about 9:30 at night in my pickup truck, and I had my great big red dog with me and my gun and my Q-beam, and I got stuck out there. The mud was kind of slick, and one of my tires got stuck, and I thought, well, you know what, I'm going to just get out there and see how bad I'm stuck. And I took my Q-beam, and I looked all around the pasture before I actually, I had the door slightly open to my truck, but I just kept looking. Now, my truck got a big old motor in it, and it makes a lot of noise. And I shined down in my holler, and I got a pond down there, and there was these great big yellow eyes looking straight back at me, and they were up in the air. And I kind of put the beam back on them, and I kept the beam right on those eyes, and they were humongous. Now, when you shine a deer, the deer eyes are on either side of the head. This had eyes straight ahead. And I did not take the Q-beam off of this thing. And it lowered itself and kept lowering itself, but it never did turn its head because it was looking right at the Q-beam. And it kept going lower and lower, and there was like a ridge there, and it looked like it was kind of sliding behind that ridge, but it never stopped looking at me. And what I can't understand is, if this is a wild animal, why didn't it run?
I agree. That wouldn't make sense. If it was a wild animal, you would expect it to take off.
But, I wound up shutting the door of the truck, and I know how to kind of get out of I've been in the woods a long time. I got my truck out of there, but I thought to myself, I am not going to walk back to the house in this pasture with those eyes looking at me like that. If I know that thing's out there, I'm not going to walk back to the house. But I finally got the truck unstuck, and I went back to the house.
I can't say I'll blame you. That reminds me of a story that a listener sent to me. He's got a pretty large spread of land, and on his land there's a lake. I'm not sure if it's a big pond or actually a lake, but he told me that every Friday night he likes to hop into his truck, drive across his acreage there, head down to the edge of that lake, and just sit there with the engine off, the lights off, and just listen to the show. And he's got a little game that he plays with himself. He tries to see if he can last until the end of the show before he loses his nerve and packs it in and heads for the house. I wonder if listening to tonight's show, if he's going to be able to make it, especially after hearing you talk about those big yellow eyes looking at him in that setting.
They were huge. Hey, I've eye-shined animals my whole life. I used to pin cows in the woods in Florida, and a lot of these were wild cattle years ago, and we would get them in the pen, and we would close gaps and stuff to shine them at night to get them to come up. Well, once we got them up in the pen, we'd shut the gaps on them, and we'd eye shine them at night. We'd shined all kinds of creatures out there in the swamps and in the woods, and I have never seen eyes that big. That is big.
Oh, I believe it. I don't doubt that whatsoever. Now, moving on, you had a strange occurrence with a bow hunter that came walking onto your property. Tell us about that.
Okay, it was years ago, a few years ago. My neighbor has a huge cattle ranch. His property touches my property down in the holler and very, very thick woods back there. Well, the hunter, I didn't know that there was anybody back there, and it was dark. It was really dark out. It had just turned nighttime. Well, my dogs were barking. Of course, there's a 6-foot fence around the house, and they can't get out. But they were barking in the direction towards the woods behind the house. And there's a big path you can drive your truck through. Well, somebody was walking up there from the path behind the house, and they were shining an LED light, and it was moving around kind of really fast. And I was like, hello? And they were like, hello? Hello? And I took my flashlight and I shined it on him, and it was a man in a ghillie suit. And there was just one of them. It was just, and he said, I got lost back there, and he told me the neighbor, he said, I was over at your neighbor's, and he allowed me to hunt on his property, and I couldn't find my way back to the road, and I was trying to hear for the traffic, and I got lost back in the hills because, I'm not used to the territory back there. And he said, I'm just going to make my way right down your driveway and out to the road if you don't mind. And I said, well, no. I said, I'll drive you back over there because I don't want you to get hit because there's no shoulder out here on my road. And he's in this dark hunting suit, and he's a great big old guy, and he's got this LED flashlight. And I said, no. I said, just wait. Let me get my keys, and I'll just run you back over to his house and to the truck. He had his truck on my neighbor's property out there hunting. Well, he was telling me he was back there bow hunting. When he got in my truck, he hardly spoke, but he had like the beads of sweat. His face was very pale, and he hardly spoke to me, and I just was like talking to him and everything, and he just happened to mention he was bow hunting. Well, I dropped him off at his truck, and I thought to myself, wait a minute, if he was bow hunting, where's his bow? Where's his equipment? So I assumed that this man was scared, and he come up behind my property and was less afraid of the dogs barking than what was chasing him back there in the woods. I'm thinking he was chased because you don't scare a hunter like that that's got a weapon. The guy had a bow. Well, he had a ghillie suit on, but he didn't have his bow with him. I assume he must have been chased by something. With all the things that have happened on this property since I've been here. I'm assuming that this man was in trouble and came up behind my house trying to get away from whatever it was.
When you consider how expensive a compound bow is, I don't think he's going to leave it unless he saw something that he wasn't prepared to see. Or like you said, unless he was chased by something that he was really shook up about being on his six. I understand that you have a horse that won't go into the barn or won't stay in the barn overnight.
Yes, he is a gelding, and he was born in 1983. He's an old horse, but he is very stout and very healthy. There was a blizzard that was going to hit. It was going to be an ice storm, basically. And I didn't know how bad it was going to be the next morning. And if you know these large animals, if they ever fall down on the ice, you won't be able to get them back up. There's no way. So I thought, I'll just put him in the barn with his feed and his hay and his fresh water. I'll close the door on him, and he'll be okay. The next morning, I'll see how bad it is, and I'll let him out. If it's bad, I'll wait until the ice melts. Just leave him in the barn. But he was not having it. He did not want me to shut that door on him. And this animal is so gentle. I mean, he's a cattle horse. This horse has seen some of the worst cattle down in Florida. We used to pen the little palmetto cows, the Florida scrub cattle, along with our other cows. And some of these scrub cattle will run right into your horse. I mean, they don't like being cornered. And this is not a horse that is afraid of anything. If a dog came out here on this property, he would chase it. And I've had a neighbor that come out here squirrel hunting, and my horse chased him too.
Oh, wow.
This is territory. Well, he didn't want to be in that barn. The next morning, I shut the door on him anyway, and he was snorting. And I was like, oh, dear. And I just felt so bad, but I didn't want him to get down on the ice if there was going to be. So the next morning, I went out there to let him out because it really didn't hit that bad. And I was going to let him out of the poor little jail. And when I opened the door, you would not believe it was just a mess in there. And there's no way that he did all that just being upset, just because I shut the door. This horse, he fought something in that barn that night. There was something that went in there after him because there was stuff all moved around. But he was okay. So.
That's strange.
Yeah.
What kind of access would something have had to get into that barn and go after that horse?
There is a window that has bars on it, but then there's a window that's completely open. And then there's a hole at the very back of the barn. And it's on the ground. And it's probably about, I don't know, maybe about 3 foot high and about 4 foot wide. So something could have come up in there and scared him and tried to get him, maybe because he was in an enclosure. Whatever is attacking my animals likes them to be in an enclosure, it looks like.
Yeah, that must be really terrifying for the animals to have something like that happen when they are pinned up like that and can't get away. Poor thing.
Sometimes I'll see him, and my animals, I trust them. Their ears, their smelling is better than humans. If somebody's walking around outside your house and you live in the city, your dog will smell that person. You'll be amazed. A dog can smell way better than we can. They will smell a person usually before they hear them. But I'll watch my horse. Horses' sense of smell is tremendous. They can smell water for like a mile away. My horse his ears will go right towards something out there behind in the woods and in the hollers, and I'll watch him looking at something, and he'll stand real erect, and his ears will be erect, and he'll be looking out there. And I'll be like, what you looking at, boy? What you see? And there's something out there, maybe staring at us, watching us.
I hope not.
I know.
With all the activity in your area with Dogman, I wouldn't be surprised, unfortunately, but I hope that's not the case. Did you say also out in the pasture you had issues with your horse being chased?
Well, back when I first moved here, I had 4 cattle horses. They were up in age. But when the ranch was taken over because the people died that owned the ranch, down there. It was 8,000-acre cattle ranch in Osceola County. When the owners died, they started selling the ranch off. So I took the old horses up to Tennessee with me because they weren't going to be useful to them. We raised horses down there, and we had over 500 head of cows. Well, I took the 4 old horses and let them retire out here on my farm because I loved them. And every one of them were good cattle horses, and they just deserved a good retirement. So most of them are gone, and I just have the one left, the one gelding. But at the time, these were very healthy quarter horses, even though they were old. They were very healthy. They would sleep down in the holler. Now, they, of course, didn't want to sleep in the barn, but they slept down in the holler away from the wind. That's what I imagine. If the wind's blowing on them, they like to be in a certain spot, and they'll sleep there. Well, there were 4 of them at the time. And it was a full moon. It was so bright outside, you could actually see. You know, sometimes the moon gets really bright, and you can just look outside your window and see. Well, I was in bed sleeping. It was totally dark, as I liked it back then. And I could hear the horses, and they would run, thunder, and you could actually, like, kind of feel the ground move, and they were just running from one side to the pasture all the way over to the other side of the other pasture. It was all open. And they would stop, and then they would run and stop and run, and there was something after them, I imagine. I ran out there, I had my gun with me, and I kept my dogs inside the 6-foot fence because I did not want them to get hurt. I didn't want them out there running out into the woods at night. I wanted them behind the fence. So I went out there, and the horses, I called for the horses. They came all the way over to where I was, and they were all standing in a row, looking towards the direction of this sound. It was a screeching, loud, it sounded that when I was a kid, there were dinosaur movies, and the pterodactyl sound, it sounded like some kind of creature from those old dinosaur films, but it was so intensely loud. And it was down in the holler where that pond was. That was the direction that it was coming from. And because the pasture, there's a hill, and then there's like a deep holler, you can't see down in there unless you go walking over there and go on down there and look. And I wasn't about to do that. But it was 1:30 at night. And my horses, the looks on their faces, their eyes were huge. They looked cartoonish. Their eyes were bulging. They were winded, and they had wrinkles. Their eyes had the wrinkles like they were so scared. You know, I've never seen them look like that before. Well, I just was listening to this thing scream, and I thought, well, should I call maybe the sheriff to come out here and find out what this thing is? Because I'm not going to go down there by myself. I will not go down there. I thought, well, gosh, I'm not even, like, really dressed. I'll have to go. And I just said, you know what? The horses are fine. That thing's down there. And the next day, I went out to look at the horses. It was daylight. And one of the horses had a 3-clawed mark on the back going from the gut area to the hip bone on the very top. Now, these are 1,000-pound quarter horses. They're big quarter horses. The claw marks were really far apart. I'd say probably about 3 or 4 inches from each claw, and it came in towards the hip in a small, went out really far and then came in towards the hip. And the whole hide was clawed into this really super sharp claws, and you could still see fresh blood in there. So it took the hide off where the claw marks were, but it didn't do any worse damage than that. So those horses, whatever was chasing them, they ran away from that thing before it hurt them really bad, and they got away from it. So
I'm glad they got away. Sounds like it was one creepy night. I don't think you got any sleep that night, did you?
No, I didn't.
The last topic I wanted to cover tonight with you, Salina, is the issue that you had with that trampled shrub. Please tell us about that and what happened.
I love collecting herbs, and I don't do any pharmaceutical medicine. I just do all natural medicine. Been doing it most of my life. I heal everything naturally, and I love it when the elderberries bloom here. They start off as a beautiful flower, and they smell so fragrant. And it's like a big umbrella of flowers. Well, I've never noticed any elderberries on my farm. Then in this particular area where I live, there aren't much elderberry bushes, but there were along the train tracks and out in other parts of Middle Tennessee that I travel. Well, I had an elderberry bush growing next to the barn. Now, I usually mow there, but this particular patch had not been mowed, and it had grown pretty tall, and there was one umbrella of beautiful little white elderberry flowers. They were just so fragrant, and I watched them turn into berries. I was going to pick this umbrella of berries. It was going to be a real big, nice chunk of elderberries, and then I was going to wash them and put them in the freezer and use them for medicine. Well, every day after work, I couldn't wait to go look at the elderberry bush. And I would go to the barn, and I would just sniff those flowers and just look at the elderberries and watch the little blossoms turn white and then turn green, and then they would start turning purple. And I was so excited to go home and just watch this bush turn into berries. It was, I was going to harvest them, and I couldn't wait. So when it came to the day that I knew I was just going to go ahead and I was going to take the whole umbrella with me, there were big, white, beautiful, dark purple elderberries, and I was going to take them that day. They were so ripe, and nothing had touched them. No birds or anything had touched them. I went out there, and all the little bushes around them were all trampled, like something had purposely broke the other little elderberries that weren't mature, and they broke them in half, and they stomped all over, rampaged all around this bush, like in a circle. And plus, the whole umbrella was gone. All the elderberries were gone. The stem was left flat, like something had just cut it off with loppers. It was just gone. And I'm like, what could have done this? What could have stolen those berries? The whole umbrella of berries was gone, and just the stem with the stalk flat cut. And all of the little elderberry bushes around there, they were just broken in half, like you would break a stick in half. And I got this fear in my belly. I was thinking, what? Was something watching me? Oogle this bush. Like every day I would come out here and look at this bush. Whatever this thing did, it came out there. It took my elderberries and it trampled everything in that direct, just right around that bush down. And I can't imagine a deer doing that, because I travel all around Middle Tennessee and I watch the elderberries bloom, and deer don't seem to eat them. I see birds, when the elderberries get ripe, you'll see them where it would be a bunch of them, and then they just start getting picked by birds. Birds will pick them and eat them. But this whole thing was gone, and it creeped me out really bad that maybe something was watching me out in the woods. Look at this bush. And my feelings were hurt, that this thing was gone, and that whatever this thing did took my elderberries and did it maliciously. And I'm mad about it. So yeah, that really happened.
I don't blame you. It kind of does make you wonder if something was watching you out there when you would go out there every day and smell the bush. But whatever it was that did that, that sounds pretty mean after all that work you put into it and everything. Not good. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share with us?
Well, I've got game cams out, and I am trying to figure out what is out there. Now, we do have coyotes out there. I don't want anything that's going to hurt my cows. I don't want anything to hurt my dogs anymore. My dogs are pretty tough, but whatever this thing was that attacked them did it maliciously, and I'm wondering if this thing thinks this is its territory. I'm not leaving. This is my place. I'm just going to have to keep asking around about things. I actually did talk to a couple of wildlife officers, and one, he was at the gas station, and I pulled in, and I told him what I saw. He immediately looked at me and said, well, I didn't even get to actually explain what I saw to him. I just pulled up, and I said, well, hey, how you doing? You know, and he's like, hey, so what's up? And I told him, I said, well, I saw something. And he goes, was it a Bigfoot? And I just kind of looked away, and I'm like, whoa. And I'm like, no. And then he goes, a chupacabra? I go, I don't know. And he goes, oh, hey, there's a buddy of mine. I got to go talk to him. Well, we'll see you later, Salina, you know. And he's like leaving. He took off, and I wasn't even able to talk to him. It's like he really wanted to get away from me because he didn't want, I guess maybe, I don't know why, but I was mad because I wanted to tell him that there was something out there. So I saw another game officer at another place in town one day when I was driving, and I pulled in, and I said, well, hey, how you doing? And he knew me too. And I got out and had a lengthy conversation with him, told him about things that had happened with the dogs, and told him about what I saw. And he never elaborated on anything he saw in particular, but what he told me was, he said, there's some things that I have seen that have scared me half to death out there in the woods. And he looked at me very seriously, and I said, you're not joking, are you? I mean, look at me. I said, really? There's things that scared you? He goes, yes. But he would not elaborate.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised in the least. In that area, you've got a lot of very strange things going on. Who knows what he might have seen spending that much time out there. I'd like to thank you at this point. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing all those amazing experiences with us. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Vic. And if anything else happens, I'll let you know, and we'll try to get some more people on to tell about their experiences if I run into them.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for doing that. Thanks again for coming, and please don't be a stranger, okay?
I will. Thank you.
Well, have yourself a great night.
Thank you very much. You too.
Will do.
Bye-bye.
Bye.